Have you ever found yourself staring at the sky in silence, waiting for an answer that never comes? Have you ever wondered why bad people prosper while the righteous suffer? Today, we'll learn about the story of a man who had the courage to ask these same questions directly to God. This is Habakkuk, when God seems silent and injustice prevails. A prophet who was unafraid to question the Almighty about the deepest mysteries of human existence. His story will transform the way you view God's silence. But be careful, there's a powerful revelation at the end of this journey that will completely change your perspective on faith in difficult times. A discovery that millions of people throughout history have found in the book of Habakkuk. And it may be exactly what your soul needs to hear today. Prepare yourself for an experience that ranges from the deepest questioning to the most unshakable faith you've ever seen in the Bible. There are times in life when the sky seems like bronze. You pray, cry out, plead, but only find an echo in the void. When God seems silent, when injustice thrives before your eyes, a soul-gnawing question arises. God, where are you? This isn't a modern sentiment. Over 2,600 years ago, a man walked the streets of Jerusalem with the same weight on his heart. He saw violence, corruption, oppression. He saw the wicked triumphing while the righteous suffered. And then he did something few have the courage to do. He questioned God directly, not with rebellion, but with a brutal honesty that touched the very heart of the Almighty. His story reveals something extraordinary about the nature of God and how he responds when our faith is at its limit. Are you ready to discover that even your deepest doubts can become the path to unshakable faith in the Bible? Then meet Habakkuk, the prophet who transformed questions into worship and divine silence into eternal hope. Imagine a man walking across the worn stones of Jerusalem, his eyes bearing the weight of a nation collapsing. Habakkuk was not just another prophet among the minor prophets of the Bible. He was different. While other prophets brought God's messages to the people, Habakkuk brought the people's questions to God. The air was heavy in those days. The smell of injustice hung around every corner, every corrupted judicial decision, every act of violence that went unpunished. Habakkuk breathed this toxic atmosphere every day, feeling his heart break with each new piece of evidence that evil prevailed over good. His feet pounded the dusty streets as his hands clenched into fists of indignation. "How long, Lord?" he muttered through gritted teeth. He wasn't a weak man surrendering to despair. He was a spiritual warrior who decided to confront the heavenly silence with the strength of his honesty. The biblical story of Habakkuk teaches us that being a prophet doesn't mean passively accepting everything. It means having the courage to bring to God not only our beautiful prayers, but also our most painful questions. He knew that a true God can endure our honesty. And it was precisely this brutal honesty that opened one of the most intimate conversations between man and God recorded in the history of biblical prophets. A conversation that still echoes in every heart that has ever felt abandoned by heaven. The scene was devastating. Judah was plunged into an unprecedented moral crisis. Injustice in the Bible wasn't just a theological concept. It was the bloody reality Habakkuk witnessed daily. Judges sold sentences, the rich oppressed the poor, and violence ran rampant in the streets. It was like watching an avalanche in slow motion. Each day brought new evidence that society was crumbling from within. The values God had established were being trampled like dry leaves in the wind. And most disturbing of all, it all happened in the midst of heavenly silence. Habakkuk couldn't understand how the God of justice allowed corruption to reign freely. Why would God permit injustice when he has all the power to intervene? This question burned in his soul like a burning coal, preventing him from finding peace. The prophet looked at the temple, a symbol of divine presence, and wondered if God was truly there. He saw corrupt priests, sold-out leaders, and people suffering without hope. Habakkuk and human suffering became inseparable in those dark days. But something extraordinary was about to happen. When the pain becomes unbearable, when the questions can no longer be swallowed, the moment of truth arrives. And Habakkuk was about to discover that God is not afraid of our hardest questions. How long, O Lord, shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? I cry to you violence, and you will not save. Habakkuk 1:2. These words broke the silence like a scream piercing the dawn. Habakkuk's prayer had nothing religious or politically correct about it. It was pure, raw, desperate. Habakkuk chapter 1 reveals a man at his wit's end. He wasn't whispering polite pleas, he was shouting his indignation to the heavens. Each word carried the weight of sleepless nights, of days watching evil triumph, of tears shed for a nation that had lost its way. Have you ever had the courage to be so honest with God, to cry out your pain without filter, without fear of appearing irreverent? Habakkuk teaches us that God prefers our brutal honesty to our empty, memorized prayers. And if you've made it this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any revelations from this extraordinary journey that is just beginning. The biblical study of Habakkuk shows us that he didn't stop at the first cry. He continued, "Why do you make me see iniquity and tolerate oppression?" These weren't the questions of a rebel. They were the questions of someone who loved justice so much that he couldn't accept its absence. But every sincere question directed to heaven has a certain destination, and the answer Habakkuk was about to receive would change not only his perspective, but our entire understanding of how God works in human history. Then God spoke, but his words were like a bolt from the blue. "Behold, I will raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs." Habakkuk 1:6. The answer came, but not as Habakkuk expected. God didn't say he would stop injustice immediately. Instead, he revealed that he would use an even more cruel nation, Babylon, as an instrument of his divine judgment. It was like asking for rain and receiving a devastating storm. Habakkuk was perplexed. How could a holy God use wicked people to punish people who, though sinful, were less wicked than the Babylonians themselves? Habakkuk and divine justice seemed to be in direct conflict at that moment. The prophet's mind struggled to process this revelation. It was like discovering that the doctor intends to cure your illness with an even more potent poison. The lessons of the book of Habakkuk teach us that God's ways often defy our human logic. But this unexpected answer was only the first act of a much larger drama. God was preparing Habakkuk and us for a deeper understanding of his sovereignty and his mysterious ways of working in history. Habakkuk's heart became a battlefield. On one side, his trust in God's holy character. On the other, his confusion in the face of a plan that seemed to contradict everything he knew about divine justice. How can we trust God in silence when his answer raises even more questions? "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil." Habakkuk 1:12-13. Habakkuk clung to what he knew about God's character, even when he couldn't understand his methods. This is the essence of faith in difficult times, holding fast to what you know to be true about God, even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. Waiting on God in affliction doesn't mean having all the answers, but trusting in the one who does. The prophet faced the universal dilemma of all believers: how to reconcile a loving God with a world full of seemingly purposeless suffering. How can we maintain hope when heaven seems deaf to our cries? But Habakkuk was about to make a discovery that would forever change his perspective. Sometimes it takes going through the deepest confusion to reach the brightest clarity. "I will stand on my watchtower and stay on the fortress. I will watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I am reproved." Habakkuk 2:1. After pouring out all his anguish, Habakkuk made a crucial decision: to stop talking and start listening. There are times in our spiritual life when we need to climb to our inner watchtower and wait in silence. Habakkuk's message of faith teaches us that questioning God is valid, but it's also necessary to create space to hear him answer. In the quiet of his tower, far from the noise of the corrupt city, The prophet prepared to receive not just an answer, but a revelation that would echo through the centuries. God was about to share something that would change human understanding of faith, justice, and eternal purpose. Unshakable faith in the Bible is not born from the absence of questions, but from the willingness to wait for God's answers in His perfect timing. Habakkuk was learning that sometimes divine silence is not abandonment, but preparation for something greater. And then, in the stillness of that spiritual tower, God began to reveal truths that would transform not only the heart of a prophet, but the faith of generations to come. Behold, the proud man. His soul is not upright in him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. Habakkuk 2:4. In these simple words was hidden a treasure that would change the course of humanity's spiritual history. Habakkuk's hope in God was being rebuilt on a whole new foundation. God has revealed that while the wicked may prosper temporarily, their fate is sealed. But for the righteous, there is an eternal promise. They will live by faith, not by circumstances, not by feelings, not by what they can see or understand, but by faith. Habakkuk's best-known verses include this revolutionary statement that would later inspire the Protestant Reformation through Paul and Luther. "The just shall live by faith" became the cry for freedom for millions who learned how to maintain faith in crisis. The prophet began to understand that God was not absent during these dark times. He was orchestrating a plan far greater than any human mind could comprehend. Temporal injustice does not negate eternal justice. It makes it even more precious. But the greatest transformation was yet to come. Habakkuk was about to make a declaration of faith so powerful that it would become one of the most quoted passages in the Bible during times of crisis. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though the sheep are cut off from the fold, and there are no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk 3:17-18. This is the revelation I promised at the beginning. The book of Habakkuk culminates in this extraordinary declaration of unconditional faith. The prophet who began by questioning God ended by worshiping Him regardless of the circumstances. Habakkuk's message resonates powerfully in our time. In a world still marked by injustice, corruption, and suffering, his spiritual journey offers real hope. When everything around us crumbles, when dreams fail, when injustice seems to triumph, we can still rejoice in the Lord. Faith in difficult times is not about having a perfect life, but about having a perfect God. It's not about understanding all His ways, but about trusting in His unchanging character. Habakkuk discovered that true strength comes not from favorable circumstances, but from the constant presence of the God of salvation. This message spans centuries because it touches something universal in the human experience. All of us, at some point, need to learn to worship God, not for what He gives us, but for who He is. Habakkuk teaches us that it is possible to find joy in the midst of the storm and hope in the heart of crisis. Habakkuk's journey reminds us that God is not afraid of our toughest questions. He is not offended by our brutal honesty, nor intimidated by our sincere inquiries. In fact, it was through his questions that Habakkuk found answers that transformed not only his life, but also generations of understanding what it means to have true faith. If you're going through a time when God seems silent, when the injustice around you is overwhelming, when your prayers seem to fall through the roof, remember Habakkuk's watchtower. Sometimes we need to stop, wait, and create space to hear God's voice amidst the chaos. The biblical story of Habakkuk invites us to a mature faith, one that can say, even if, in the face of the greatest adversity. Even if everything goes wrong, even if we don't understand God's ways, even if heaven seems closed, we can rejoice in the one who is our eternal salvation. Leave a comment sharing which part of this message touched your heart most. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive more transformative stories from the Bible. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to have hope in God even when all seems lost. May you find in Habakkuk the courage to ask God your most difficult questions and the faith to wait for his answers in his perfect timing. For the righteous will live by faith. No matter how dark the night, the dawn will come.